Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Hang on, we're in for a ride. I can't start this without saying that I was born in 1934 on August the 1st, and I was born on the kitchen table at 914 South Hubbard Avenue in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that was kind of Slumville. Shortly after we moved to 1012 South First West, we had the railroad running in front of us and behind us, so that was even worse. Flash now to age 15. I started working for my uncle, who was a mason contractor. He had learned the trade from his father, had worked on many buildings, including South High School, during the depths of the Depression. During that period of time, a bricklayer, if he stopped to light a cigarette, he could get fired because there was 100 bricklayers down on the sidewalk waiting to get called up to take his place. Anyway, he made a lot of money on one job and moved out to the country. 2966 South Melbourne Street. And it was out in the country, and we lived on First West. He had me come out and just do whatever. He planted a big garden. I would take care of the garden. He had a horse. I would ride the horse, exercise the horse. I worked for 25 cents an hour. I rode the bus out to his house. I rode the bus back from his house. Eventually, he says, you need to learn to be a bricklayer. You learn to be a bricklayer by being a hod carrier first. And when I say hod carrier, that's exactly the term that was used in those days. When I was 10, 11, 12, my grandpa was retired, but people would want him to come and do little jobs. And he would, and I was always his hod carrier, just as a kid. Yeah. The materials we used were different. In those days, concrete blocks were not even invented yet. If they wanted something bigger than just a regular brick, they were double high brick. It was like 2 bricks in one, and they were called jumbos. They were packed in a big container that was about 5 feet tall, 5 feet wide, and 4 foot deep. And they were brought by a special truck that picked them up and lifted them up so they were on a horizontal plane, and they wouldn't fall out of the open part of this container. When they got to the job, they would lower them down to the ground and pull away from them. As simple as that. And the first job that I remember working on as a hod carrier, it was off holiday from school, and it was on Lerner's shop on 3rd South between Main and State. And we built runways out of plank from ground level up to about 8 foot tall, which was the first level, because the back of the building was lower than the front of the building. And I don't remember how many of us there were. I think there was 3 of us hod carriers, and I think there was 5 bricklayers working on the job. And we were using those jumbo brick and we'd take a wheelbarrow, park it alongside of those packages of brick, for want of a better word, and we'd just push them over into the wheelbarrow. It didn't take time to stack them or anything. Just load up the wheelbarrows, head up the ramp, dump them on the floor, run down and get another load. And that went on all day. I'm not exaggerating. That was my job because I wasn't smart enough or good enough to make the mortar. Let's talk about mortar. In those days, they had what was called limestone lime. In order to use the lime, you had to slack the lime, and you'd slack it in a tub that was about a foot deep, about 15 inches deep, 5 feet wide and 8 feet long. You would fill it with water, and then you would start putting bags of this 50-pound bags of the lime in. And as you was putting them in, they would heat up. And by the time you got a dozen or so of these bags of lime in this water, that water was boiling, literally boiling. That was called slacking. We would put in enough to make that thing full. And that would be the lime to use tomorrow. That was the last thing you did before you left the job. Nowadays, of course, they have hydrated lime, which has already been slacked in a huge machine. So you don't longer have to do that. The main reason for this is to let you know bricklaying today is not bricklaying yesterday, okay? The job that came to my mind to talk about this was my uncle had a nephew on his wife's side that was one of the best bricklayers in the whole valley. He was an amazing bricklayer. His name was Merle Stapley. Merle would he'd sit and laugh at me because you'd make the mortar, which I had learned to do by this time, and you'd load it in a mortar hod. A mortar hod is a bigger one, 2 feet long, V-shaped, with one end in it. You'd load about 200 pounds of mortar in it. You'd load it with it vertically. You had a little gadget to hold it up while you loaded it. You'd get your shoulder underneath it, walk over, go up the hod ladder. Hod ladders were unlike other ladders because the rungs were only about 4 inches apart. Because carrying that on your shoulder, you had to really strain, and there's no way you could take an 8-inch step. A 4-inch step was about what you could accomplish in one step. So you'd go up 4 inches at a time. The thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about this, we'd already built the fireplace and everything. It was up on the chimney. It was about, a foot above the roof, so about 9 feet high when we started. I would get a load of mud in that hod. I'd get up there. He would take that hod and throw the mortar in the chimney so he could fill in the guts. That's what they used to call it. The extra bricks around the flue. You know, you couldn't just put a flue in, you had to have brick lining around it. And then I'd have to run down and fill the brick hod, which wasn't quite as big. It was more like this, and you would stack the brick in it, and you'd get about, 30 bricks, something like that. Same thing, up the ladder, take the brick, dump it in. He'd just laugh. That's called work. That's a hod carrier. We was doing work on the 3rd floor. So you'd take the hod up one step, travel across the floor, up another ladder to the 2nd level, Same thing, go over another place and go up to the third floor. And by the time you got there, you was ready to fall on your face. And that goes on all day long. This is where Grandma comes into the picture. While I was attending high school, I worked at a service station. And I bought a 1941 Ford four-door. Nice car. But I didn't like the color of it. So I decided to paint it, took it down to the service station with my boss's permission, and painted the car the most beautiful dark metallic blue. Grandma was down there watching me, and every stitch of clothes she had on was blue. Her hair, it wasn't a paint bay, it was just a bay in the service station. It was really a sight to behold. I spent a week cleaning the stuff off of everything in the service station. Dumb. Anyway, that was my experience as a service station attendant. We graduated from school. All of my buds, including myself, signed up for the Air Force. My mother suffered from depression bad. And when she found out I'd signed up, she come unglued. And rightfully so. I should have never even considered it because Mom was not in good shape and I knew it. She had been in a hospital, to help her. She actually had electric shock treatments. And so my uncle, bless his heart, he says, if you'll stay home, I'll teach you to be a bricklayer. So from that time on, I was learning to be a bricklayer because I already learned how to be a hod carrier. Oh, there were many buildings that we worked on. But I think the first one that comes to my mind is Evergreen Junior High School. And I think it's still there. It's a duplicate of Valley over here. They were built on the same plan. And so my Uncle Al had the contract on that. And I had been learning to be a bricklayer before that. I was a pretty good bricklayer by the time we got to that point. But I definitely remember working on the Evergreen Junior High School. I think we built South Kearns Elementary and a couple other schools I just can't remember. So he got to be a bigger contractor, and he even took a contract on a dormitory at BYU. They have a group of buildings that are all about the same. I think there was 4 of them that were built on the same plan. I think they might have had different colored brick, but anyway. So yeah, he became a bigger contractor at that point. And it's that building that he nearly went bankrupt. He made a mistake and bid the job for the same price the guy that had bid the one before. And there was enough difference in it that it cost several $1,000s more to build the one that he got the contract on. And he was so despondent when this happened, and rightly so. It was a dumb thing for him to do. By the way, he had an 8th grade education. And he, in his career, probably taught I can think of 10 right off the top of my head. 10 nephews and a neighbor to be bricklayers. He would just do that. And it gave 10 men a trade, including me. But I was there when that situation at BYU happened. I didn't work on that, by the way. I forget where I was working. But anyway, he got he was going to just hang it up, lick his wounds and quit. Well, I says, okay. So about that time, I started contracting and building houses. That's all I did. And I'm here to tell you, that's a dog-eat-dog thing. A general contractor will sell you out for a nickel. Find somebody that'll do it a nickel cheaper. You really had to fight to get a job. But I got a contract. Well, you didn't sign contracts. You say, okay, I'll do those for X amount of dollars per foot, or that was mainly what it was, the per foot price, plus if there was a chimney or extra, you know. And I got a bunch of houses up in Brigham City to build. And so I asked him if he would be interested in helping me, you know, just to get out of the house and do something. And he was a good bricklayer. My Uncle Al was a good bricklayer. He stayed with it, and he made me a deal. He says, I'll help finance you on bigger jobs if that's what you want to do. So we started out kind of together, and I don't know what happened really. He just he didn't want to work. He took off playing and left me with all the bookwork and all the bossing and the bidding and the whole 10 yards. So that kind of ended that thing. It just, I would give him a part of the profit on some jobs, and that was kind of helped him on his retirement. But it was then that I started doing a lot of work at Hillfield, because Hillfield was a government. You had to pay government scale. They insisted that which was union scale, and what you have to know, there was a lot of non-union contractors around, and that they were the ones taking all the housing. And they'd work, some of them were work for a lot less than we were working for. So by working at Hillfield, I was in competition with people that had to pay union wages, which that was a good thing. I made pretty good money on some of those jobs. I have to tell you about one job in particular. It was called the Bachelor's Enlisted Quarters. And we started in late September. And we got the first floor all done. Was halfway through the second floor. And what these walls were 6-inch blocks that were solid grouted. And it had poured concrete floors on top of them. So these block walls supported the concrete floors. Well, I don't know, you probably guys remember that every once in a while the east winds come out of the canyons, especially up that direction. In fact, if you go around on the east bench, you see the trees. They're all leaning like that. Well, so happens on the second floor, we had the walls all up. I was lined up to grout them the next day. Grout them means put concrete in the middle of in the cores with reinforcing in them. Well, one of those tsunamis come up, and we got to work the next day, and those walls were all laying down just like dominoes. We built 3 new buildings, and all they did was put the fuel in and take the fuel out. In fact, they were called defueling buildings. There's 3 of them that lines the south end of the runway at Hillfield. And, you know, over the north end, where the old hangar buildings are, every time a new plane would come in, we did remodeling and those things. So yeah, Hillfield was just almost a continual job. I just keep bidding, and I got a lot of the jobs. So as far as me pointing out jobs that I've built, it might seem like a small amount, but I wasn't not busy. I was working in Hillfield, which was a lot of travel. But I built some buildings up there that I was proud of. Yeah, just a laying brick flat like this, you know, 2 on 1. They're vertical, you know, like this. This bank was all vertical, soldier courses, the whole thing, but they were round walls. That building won us an award. At that time, the masonry industry in Salt Lake had grown to where there was actually an organization that recognized workers and architects and suppliers and that. And we had, once a year, had a big blowout. We won the award for the best building, for the most attractive, better use of masonry. And the architect on it was a good friend of mine's brother. So yeah, we even sat at the same table with him and his wife at that recognition banquet. It was a steel frame building, and it was just a brick veneer. No masonry support whatsoever. It was just a facade, just to make it look good. And unfortunately, the people that did the steel work were clowns. There was so much wrong with that, I can't even tell you. You know, you start on the concrete, on the main level, on the foundation. And unbeknownst to me, I had no clue that the steel wasn't where it belonged. I had no reason to think that it wasn't right. Well, the bottom floor had these big square columns, you know, but the facade on both sides continued up after, you know, you get to the height of the interior building on the first floor. We get up there. This wasn't too bad. It was only out in ½ inch. But this one was out 2 inches. So we had to taper the brick. And this continued all the way up. We went out, and then we went in, and then we went out. 5 stories. When I saw that, I told the general contractor superintendent that I wouldn't be responsible for that. If they wanted me to build the building, they would take responsibility for it, or they would have it fixed. They would get all of these situations, and I haven't explained why. They have ledger angles that hold the brick. So you come up from the first floor against the angle iron, then you start on top of the angle iron that holds the weight of the brick to the next floor. Every floor is the same way. Well, those angle irons, of course, needed the face of the angle irons needed to be back a half an inch from the face of the brick. Well, like I say, they were out, and they were in, and they were out. This one wasn't quite as bad, but it was, you know, I had to move it an inch. And that was just part of the story for the whole building. That was built with funds from the Harmon Employees Pension or Retirement Fund. And having shopped at Harmon's for years and knowing the Harmons, I was so distraught about this whole thing. But there's a further thing about this, and this we could make work because it had nothing to do with the steel. But we had to come up to an exact height where the general contractor had built a 45-degree angle support to hold the brick. The brick would come up. We had special brick made that transformed from the vertical to the 45 degree and then went over because the windows were all set back. And of course, that was part of building the building. We built along the face on these angle irons, and then at each window, return to the window. So it was a tricky building, and it was designed to look good and be good. But unfortunately, part of the problem was the brick that we got. I don't really know what happened, but they weren't the same color. And they varied greatly, and they weren't uniform in how they, I mean, it wasn't like they were speckled. It was like you'd get a run of light ones, and then you'd get some dark ones and some medium. Well, the architect come glued, swore it was my fault. He says, you should have taken all those brick and laid them out on the ground and selected them all and mixed them up so they came out perfect. The architect pointed out certain bricks that he just couldn't live with. Okay. I put my son on the forklift. It would lift 30 feet. And then I put a ladder on the forklift that I had him go up another 10 or 12 feet. Of course, I wired the ladder on, and he's going around with a paintbrush and painting them. I wasn't about to take those damn brick out. It wasn't in fact, there's a junior high school right down the street here that was built out of the same brick, and it's exactly the same thing. It's just, you know, you get what you get when you buy brick. One more story about that building. The west side of the building, you know, instead of going from the south to the north in a straight line, no, the middle of the building went like this. We had to do what they call run twigs, 3 different twigs, so it didn't become a angle. We had to do one here, and one there to make it kind of round and follow the building, because the general contractor would not make the erection contractor fix it. It was a nightmare. That whole building was a nightmare. arches always present not a problem. It's just fun to do when you're doing something different. But it was that point on that building that I had a conversation with my cousin, Bill Emerson. And he was just, Bill was like I was early on in my marriage. We were both drunkards, not paying attention to doing things the right way. But we were working on that building, and I had become active before that. But he had so many questions. He had just started getting interested in the church. And by the way, he and his wife did go to the temple. But it was a neat experience to have these conversations with my cousin Bill on that building. By the way, he was a bricklayer, as was my cousin Roy.
So we have photos from the high school as well.
Oh, well,
So you
now
had done
you're
an,
talking something that,
I know, cause you just mentioned that your uncle built the high school, right?
he worked
And then-
on the original high school.
And then you did
I'm
the
glad
addition,
you brought
right?
that up. And then in 1964, we went back and put an addition on it. And I don't think that you could drive down the street and tell where the initial building was and the add-on. We did it that good. You couldn't find any brick like this. We tried to get the brickyard, the people that made the brick originally, they couldn't acquire the clay to match it. But they had some brick that were about the right color range, except they were too light. The variegated thing. So the brickyard, laid them out and sprayed them with black coloring and oil, diesel fuel. And that's how we got that look. But that's another one of those. The general contractor let a concrete form get by, and on the end two bays on the northwest, the concrete was sticking out so bad, we had to cut the brick in half to get by the concrete. But like the general contractor told me, he says, "You'll laugh about this someday." I don't laugh, but it's not the big deal it was when we was doing it. We matched everything as far as it was a concrete foundation. We had to put those stones on the front of the foundation. You see those tiles up there in the squares? They on a 45-degree angle. We had to build those ahead of time. There was bricks, 4 bricks laid together with an opening in the middle of them. They put a little tile in it.
Beautiful. That is a beautiful building.
And this was built in, like I say, 1931. I think it was the year it opened. This was built because of the Depression. The federal government helped local people with money to put people to work. Let's go back to Judge Memorial High School, which was built in, I don't know, it was probably the 60s. And we built the facade on this building, not just the facade. We had blocks backing it up. This building was not steel, it was precast concrete, columns and beams and floor, the whole stuff was precast concrete. And after we built it, Beaner Concrete engineers says, wow, we really got a problem. Because on top of every one of those windows was an angle iron to hold the bricks and hold the block behind it. There were 6-inch blocks, so it was a 10-inch wall. But they were bearing not on angle irons that were fastened to the superstructure. They were just sitting on top of the columns. There's little 2-foot wide columns of brick going up, and these angle irons were sitting on those, and that's all that was supporting this whole thing in Shaky City, earthquake country. So after this building was all built, and 2 or 3 years later, they decided they had to go in and anchor. So they went in the backside, broke open the block, and there was already anchor things in the concrete columns. So they welded rods, not rods, actually I think it was angle irons of some kind, steel connections to hold those angle irons in place with the structure of the building. Because the structure of the building was earthquake proof. But my brick facade was not. It was just an accident waiting to happen. And I don't know, I guess I should have been smart enough to catch it right while we were building, but I figured, well, it's good enough for them, I guess it's good enough for me. We went down to Cedar City in 1994 and built, I think it was 1,000 feet long, and I can't remember how wide it was. It was a building for O'Sullivan Furniture Manufacturing. And that was some building, I'm here to tell you. It had areas that had 4-foot thick concrete floors to hold up the equipment that they used to make this prefab furniture. Have you ever heard of O'Sullivan? They were big, but I think it might have been this building that put them under, because they weren't there very long. They were there long enough to work for maybe 2 years, and then they shut the plant down and never heard of O'Sullivan again. But anyway, that was my next to last job. We're going to start in Laughlin.
Yeah.
That was the very last job that I did. And by the way, Josh was my hod carrier down there, our hod carrier, and he did a heck of a good job. Your mom and dad, well, I think you kids were there too. Mm-hmm. You came down to visit us. That was another one of those buildings that was precast concrete, and the floors were what they call double T's. It's a vertical membrane with pre-stressed cables that hold it up, and thin extrusions that come out from that, and they just stacked them along on the supporting portion. Well, they have to pour concrete on top of them because they're only 2 inches thick. So, and the concrete contractor on that job was the same one in Cedar City. And they were so efficient in Cedar City. I mean, they did everything right. Helped me a lot. But in Laughlin, it was a whole nother story. The point I'm trying to get at here is they made a big boo-boo. You got to go underneath and shore these things up. So the weight of the concrete they're putting on when it's fresh and doesn't support itself, you got to hold that weight up. Well, they forgot to put the supports down below, and they started pouring the concrete on top. And they couldn't figure out where this concrete was all going. They got about 8 inches of concrete, then it dawned on them, this is continuing going down. They decided that they better get down there and shore it up. But the point of it is, this was just one area. They had shored up the rest of it. For some reason, this area got missed. We laid blocks on top of these floors. Well, I think they were about 30 feet between columns. The one that they goofed up on, we started with a block 8 inches tall, okay? Let me see how this goes. Oh yeah, we went from 8 inches tall to nothing on the other side to level it up. Get lots of crazy stuff. But yeah, those 2 out-of-town jobs I made good money on, and thank goodness I did, because it's had to last us.
No, it wasn't
You had to
good.
wash the brick with acid?
Oh yeah, that was one of my pre-hod days. I used to go around with Uncle Jack, and he had kind of taken over washing Uncle Al's brick jobs. And when you get them done, you got to wash them with acid to get all the mortar chunks and everything off. You knock the chunks off, and then you wash it with acid and rinse it with water. And that cleans the brick so you don't have the smears of the mortar all over.
How do you do that? Was it like a pressure wash? Was it you were wearing hand
It was
washing?
bucket and a brush.
Yeah. Wow.
Bucket and a brush with a long handle.
Yeah.
You be
But
careful.
I probably still
You
show
just-
you scars that would get inside of my gloves. And they
he
pretty
come-
well healed.
He'd come home with some nasty
But
ones.
I had scars on both hands. Yeah, it was a whole different ballgame in those days.
Yeah.
Now, yes, they use pressure washers.
Yeah.
And they use something that's different than acid. It's basically an acid, but it's not near. This is muriatic acid, which is hydrochloric acid. Alls I can say is masonry, building, kind of provided me a good living to raise my family. And for that I'm grateful. For that I'm grateful for my uncle to teach me a trade. There's a lot of young men out there that's been to college and can't even find a job, so yeah, I don't. Working with your hands is not a bad word. It is. When you're working with your hands, you can step back and look at it and say, I did that, and be proud. And I guess that's why I took down some walls that I wasn't proud of. However, I took them down. And being able to work on my own home brings back memories. Good memories. A bricklayer can do what a dentist never could think about doing. Pee on your work.
Don, they didn't ask you to get gross. He
And
had great arms. I had a couple of my girlfriends that thought he had beautiful arms.
there, I didn't hear what she said.
She said you had beautiful
you had
arms.
great arms. You and your strong arms.
My really good friend thought he had gorgeous arms.
Ooh.
That's the most important part.